Welcome to Mainly AI, the show where artificial intelligence meets real-world impact. Join us as we explore the latest breakthroughs in AI and other emerging technologies and how they're changing business, science, and your everyday life. From startup founders to academic minds, we bring in the experts shaping the future and break it all down in a way that's smart, sharp, and seriously fun. There's nothing to fear. AI can help humanity in so many ways. It's an exciting time to be alive. This is Mainly AI. And now your hosts, Dan Mitchell and Vibby Jacob.
Hello, welcome back to Mainly AI, where we explore powerful ideas in mainstream technology with clarity and curiosity. Today, we are diving into a bold reframing of artificial intelligence. So, how this happened is we came across this paper which talks about AI as not magic, not some sort of a sentient overlord, but more as a normal technology. And got it right, it is normal. So, this is based on a very sharp, nuanced essay by Arvind Narayan and Sayash Kapoor. And it is the perspective reset that you didn't know that you needed. What it talks about is like AI isn't magic. It's not a god. It's not a demon. It's just a general purpose technology, just like electricity or internet. And the real power lies in how we humans choose to use it. So think about electricity. Electricity didn't transform homes overnight. It took decades for that transformation to happen. So while AI might feel really fast and a lot of things happening today, the impact, the societal impact, the diffusion comes at a very small pace.
Yeah, thanks for that intro. This was a very interesting publication, right? And I can totally see how people, because of the uniqueness of it, how people would react. Think about when all of a sudden everybody started using Chat GPT and magically it could talk to you and you could talk back, and it's continued to evolve. And now people are worried, oh, what if this thing is going to completely take over? Well, for those of us who have been around long enough, the internet was a very similar experience as we went from dial-up to always on internet, and now we lean very heavily on it. But there's strong concern that, oh, this is going to ruin everything. Electricity had that same effect, right? It's one of those major turning points in humanity, really, where people start to get a little bit nervous. But AI isn't a magic mind. It's more like electricity. It's powerful, it's useful, but it's still under human control, right? When used correctly, it can be used for good, which is a key element of this publication. Right.
One of the things I've noticed is like all these charts and graphs that show how many years it took for, adoption to happen compared to PC, compared to internet, compared to electricity, and, how many years or months it took to reach that, whatever figure, 1 million or so, right? And there is one point that I feel that that's missed. For electricity, PC, internet, there was an investment that was required by the user, right? Like buying a PC, getting a broadband connection, getting electricity into your home, into your factory, and so forth. And AI in this case, it's practically free. Yes, there are paid versions of it, but it's free. Therefore, this tendency to say, yes, therefore the diffusion is high. Not really. I mean, it's more like the intensity of use. How many hours do we, spend during a work week using AI tools, right? So the usage is different. The key points that the authors make in this paper, which I found to be very interesting. And their point is that, it's not really something, very different, etc. We shouldn't sort of make those attributions. We should treat it just like any other technology and look at the good and bad of it, and then make sure, we have the societal, institutional forces, etc., in place to progress. And they talk about these 3 layers of AI progress, Dan. It splits into what's called methods, where this diffusion that I mentioned is happening faster, like the, GPT, the models, the whole, large language models, the
Yep.
new single discontinuous sort of like process improvements that have. And the next set is like what they call as like applications, how you actually turn these models into products. That is on the slower side because there are things like which you can do fast, like general things, versus things that are, let's say, like, more high consequence tasks where the adoption or the sort of like conversion from a model into an actual application is really slow, given all the surround context that's required. A lot of knowledge is tacit and so forth, and it's not easy to convert something into a product right away. And then finally, so sort of like comes into actually how it spreads the societal, impact that happens, how it seeps into industries and so forth. And some of the analogies they gave is like, electricity, yes, once electricity came forth, it just didn't sort of like show up in factory floors and things like that. There were workflow redesigns that needed to happen. Factory floors needed to be redesigned. Production line setups needed to be changed, and so forth. And any sort of a technology, that's sort of like what's happening. So therefore, this adoption, the societal diffusion, sort of like will be the slowest, according to Narayan and Kapoor. And the actual integration to industries will happen over time. And we see some of those, like especially when we look into the regulated industries, high consequence tasks, as they call it, and so forth. All right. So
Sure.
that's what I would say about these three key aspects of AI.
But so if we think about this, because you're framing it very much from a business perspective, right? And there's a societal perspective. There's going to be regulation that will come. And while we haven't seen a ton of it yet, there'll be regulation for that, just like anything else. We saw it with the internet. We saw it with even electricity. And then there's going to be a cultural aspect of it. Is it widely accepted? Is it okay to use AI? Even in academic situations where in the outset, people would look at AI and say, you're cheating on your schoolwork if you're using it for research.
Right.
Because maybe you should be using books or the internet. That's a very traditional way of thinking. And now it's becoming more widely accepted. You look at some of the work that Austin is doing around the acceptance of AI as a primary research source for schoolwork is very forward thinking. And so there's a culture that's being built there. And then the last part, we talk about infrastructure. If you watch the show 1923, you'd see the resistance of adoption of electricity when they started to bring it out west into Montana. And as it becomes available or more widely available and for a reasonable cost, I think that also helps drive adoption. So you say free, but if we look at even a Chat GPT subscription, the free version is not the paid version. The plus version is not the pro version. Just like anything else, the adoption, the barrier to entry is almost always cost to start, but then is it useful, right? Because just like electricity, if you don't have a bunch of electric appliances, it doesn't make a ton of sense
Exactly.
for you to invest to put electricity into your farmhouse, right?
Right.
But just because we can build it doesn't mean society will adopt it overnight. So maybe with the AI, that'll change.
Exactly. And then that's one of the points that they make, right? That there is a lot of transformation in the surround industries that need to happen along with it to kind of like have this diffusion in the traditional way that we talk about, like for other general purpose technologies that have happened in the past, right? So their caution is more, let's say, like, against this notion of a super intelligence, right? Super intelligence, they call it, as they use the term, incoherent, right? What they're saying is like, okay, let's not sort of like get into this notion of like an AI doomsday. We should more think about like misuse, misalignment, biases creeping in, poor institutional frameworks that exist and so forth. And naturally like lopsided sort of like dynamics that exist within different institutions, power, and so forth. And how do we sort of like it's not so much as like, they're leaning towards the utopian or the dystopian sort of like way. They're saying like, yes, AI is useful, AI is providing value, but it will evolve in the way that we set up these controls around it as such. So that's one of the key ideas that's there in this particular paper.
But there's an element of trust there. Anytime you start to use something new, there's an element of trust, especially when the stakes are high. As we've seen, AI can tend to hallucinate. And while it's gotten better over time, you think about other high stakes things that have been rolled out, self-driving cars, right? Now you're putting your life on the line, trusting that. Sure, you have a pretty good shot of getting where you're trying to go, but at the same time, there's not a 0% chance that you could crash. There's always a chance that something could happen. You think about if you go all the way back to during the early space race, where people were doing math by hand, and now you've computers that took over these calculations. They didn't trust them 100%. They used to spot check the work, and then over time, because there was some urgency there, they started to build more trust toward it because they figured out that, hey, it's science, it's math, it's pretty straightforward, and we should start to trust these systems, even with the stakes being what they were, right?
Yep, I fully agree. Regarding that self-driving example that you just gave, which is referenced in the paper, by the way, as talking about, safety regulations and things like that that need to be there in the autonomous driving, and how that actually drives the success of some of these companies, right? They give the example of Cruise, which got shut down due to safety, not being able to meet the safety standards, as well as sort of like, Uber, as well as Waymo. And the difference in the success across these different companies related to that. One of the interviews that I watched of Arvind and Suryansh, they actually talk about the fact that like when automobile industry sort of like came into being, they weren't really thinking about safety either. So a lot of new technologies, when they start out, they're not really thinking about the safety, and they evolve over time due to accidents as well as irreversible mistakes from irreversible decisions as such that led to sort of like point of failure, or let's say like, loss of reputation, PR failures and so forth. And that brought about the notion that the car manufacturer is in charge of the safety of the car, right? Like that came about over a period of time. It was not there, like, right at the advent of that automobile technology as such. So similar to that, their point is like, as AI evolves, the companies who are sort of like building it, they do have a responsibility in terms of like, building the right safeguards and guardrails and things like that. But of course, they re-emphasize the fact that human control will remain, absolutely critical in terms of like these AI products and deployments and so forth.
Sure. If you think about it, there's risks with everything, intended, unintended. Human control is an important element of it. And for anyone who's watching the video, we've been flashing on the screen some of the quotes from the publication just so folks can follow along. But so as we think about, all right, we need to maintain control, then we start to talk about, well, what are the risks? Accidents being one of them. Misuse, any technology could be misused. We've seen it with bad actors who are using voice cloning technology or spoofing, moving too fast. There's always an inherent risk. We've seen that in a bunch of different ways, some of those in safer environments than others. And then sometimes things just don't line up. Like the intent of what you've created goes awry, right? It turns into something else. You go back to history, and I always drag it back to history. You think about Tesla, not Tesla the company, but Tesla the man, had these visionary ideas for electricity, right? He was going to broadcast electricity through the air. Fantastic idea. Didn't fully understand what that meant. It became very dangerous. You look at Marie Curie, right? Breakthroughs with radiation, had no idea that she was giving herself radiation poisoning all along the way. So like radiation or early electricity, the biggest dangers are going to be the ones that we don't see coming.
Right. I think they make the argument that like, yes, if you look at most of these risks, and then sort of like you understand the risks, but you're not sort of like using the technology in high consequential sort of like tasks, let's say like crime prediction and life impacting sort of like decisions, right? So it's not so much as like, you want to kind of like talk about like AI domination, world domination, or, the other scenario being killer robots as such, right? So you want to sort of like make sure that some of these risks are taken into account. And then therefore, like, there is a need to look at what should you do in terms of like, you understand these different things. You understand how it is more of, let's say, like an augmentation rather than a substitution in terms of like, that was one of the other points that I really liked in that paper, where they said that, look, most of the tasks will kind of like evolve into interpreting AI as well as sort of like managing AI. It's just the same way that when other technologies came about, there was a redesign of jobs as such, not necessarily like sort of like just a disappearance of things overnight as such, right? So it was more of redefinition, not erasure, was one of the key things that they mentioned in the paper. In terms of like given these risks, as well as like when we are looking at how things are evolving, the natural question would be, what should we do given these risks, as well as the way AI is evolving in the general realm, not so much as like the domain specific realm. What should we do? Should we
Well,
be looking at what is the prescription?
but before that, the first thing we should do, and I know that Sam Altman says it's costing a lot of money, but I do always say please and thank you to the LLMs, because those killer robots you talked about, just on the outside chance that they come looking for us, I want them to spot me and be like, hey, that's the guy that said please and thank you. He's good. Let him go. Hopefully they'll cut me a break there. But just quickly on the kind of evolution of jobs and what that means, going back to that other example with the space race, and what we literally had human computers, that was their job title, was computer, right? And so as they went down the path of using these computers more and more, that it's just the computers took over the calculations, but the people didn't disappear, right? If you remember the
Exactly.
movie Hidden Figures, right? They became supervisors, decision makers, system designers. They embraced the technology.
Right.
And there's an opportunity here where you have basically the concept of the manager of AI agents is one that's been put out, but it's going to continue to evolve at the pace that things are moving. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
but what should we do? What's your take on this? What should we do? There's what the article says, but what should we do?
If we look at, I think like I look at AI as not a miracle, not a monster, more of a mirror, right? Like, so what we put in is what we get. So even if you look at like the models are more interpreting based on the data that's within the corpus of data that it's trained on, right? So it's more of a reflection rather than anything else, right? So us making sure that the right guardrails are set, the right values, etc., and also understanding the limitations of AI as it progresses, right? What it can and cannot do, and not sort of like falsely or simplistically extrapolating it to do everything that a human can do. That is basically that where I kind of like think in terms of like what we should do, what we should be mindful about, right? The race to AGI and everything is progressing. And yes, there will be more developments in those spaces, etc. But as things move along, we should just be mindful of the limitations. And there's no one clear benchmark or anything that can actually provide that value, right? Benchmarks suffer from its own set of limitations. Therefore, it's more being sort of like making sure that we have the right policies, the usage of AI, not to sort of like tightly regulated enough so that like, the progress can be continued to make, but the values and the structures of the world are reflected within it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's right. Also, making sure we're ready for it. Plan, plan for the worst and hope for the best. Uh, I think putting bans on these things is a terrible idea. We need to just stay very close to them, study them. I wish that we had studied the effects more closely when social media was rolling out, but everyone was so busy scrolling it that they didn't bother studying it. So here we are now. But to your point, the solution is not to slam the brakes. It's more to add better headlights so we can see where we're going with it. And one of my favorite tech people in the world has been attributed of saying something along the lines of technology is about enabling human potential. That's Michael Dell. And he's right. The idea that technology is an enabler, not a replacement, and not meant to cause harm, or AI should serve as the ability to enhance human potential, not replace it. That's my take on that. So
Absolutely. Fully agree. I don't think it's about, go ahead.
I was going to say, any last thoughts on it?
I think it's not about fear. The whole thing about the paper is like, it's the call to action. Like, it's not about fear. It's more about stewardship, right? Active stewardship that needs to happen. And, this reframing, if it causes us to pause and think in terms of like how AI will play out, I think that is a major, difference in this world of like where we are kind of like always talking about like tech determinism, right? And sort of like this wild sort of like two sectors or two domains of thinking, one wildly optimistic and the other sort of like the doomsday. So I found that paper to be extremely refreshing. And I would reiterate the fact that like, it's not a miracle, it's not a monster, it's a mirror. It mirrors whatever it reflects back with the values and, structures that we put in. So
I like that framing a lot. That makes a lot of sense. So with that, I think we will wrap it up. We will put the links to the publication in the page for the podcast. Thanks for joining us today on Mainly AI. Be sure to like our page, follow, and all that fun sort of stuff. And if you're interested in joining us for a conversation or have any suggestions, drop us a line.
Yep. If this reframing sparked something new for you, share it. Rate it. We would love to hear about like how you're thinking about AI differently now that you're kind of like aware of this paper. Go read it. It's a very long paper, 15,000 words.
Yeah, it's going to take a minute. It took me a bit. All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
This has been Mainly AI, the show where artificial intelligence meets real-world impact. It's our passion to explore the latest breakthroughs in AI and other emerging technologies, and how they're changing business, science, and all of our lives. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. Dan and Vibby love hearing feedback, and they want you to be a part of the community. So hit them both up on X at Dan Mitchell US and at Vibby Jacob. And you didn't think we wouldn't have a website, did you? Go to mainlyaipodcast.com. See you in the future.